Welcome to the Week 2 screencast on resiliency, risk, and protective factors. The material in this PowerPoint is from Modern Social Work Theory by Malcolm Payne, and there are additional sources within this presentation as well. So this slide presents a brief overview of resilience, risk factors, and protective factors. So, in a nutshell, resilience is the individual's capacity to bounce back from adversity and/or manage life's challenges. Risk factors are characteristics, and they can come from the biological, psychological, family, community, or cultural level that are associated with a higher likelihood of negative outcomes. And protective factors are characteristics associated with a lower likelihood of negative outcomes or that reduce a risk factor's impact. We're going to be using some examples as we go through this presentation. So here is one brief definition. Resilience has been defined here as a process of dealing with or adapting to daily stressors as well as to adverse critical events, while still maintaining effective functioning. So resilience is utilized throughout our lives. It's integrated throughout our daily life in dealing with daily stressors that we encounter, the ways that we might be overwhelmed, and as well as when we encounter those big crisis events, natural catastrophe, one-time traumatic event, for example, a car accident, or some other type of event that's unexpected and unpredictable. This slide is a compilation of additional ways of understanding what resiliency is all about. Resilience is a person, has a good track record of successful adaptation in the face of stress or disruptive change. So it's important to understand that resilience isn't a one-time thing. Resilience happens over time. And it's a skill set that we can call upon to help us when we're undergoing some stress or some difficult change in our lives. Resilience refers to good adaptation despite stressful experiences. So again, the process of adaptation, that's an important term from social systems theory and ecological theory that we looked at. As people, as human beings, we are constantly adapting to our circumstances. We constantly have to make room for those things that happen that are positive, and we also have to make room for things that happen that are not so positive or that are outright negative in our lives. But we need to adapt. We need to find ways of coping. We need to find ways of making the best of our environment, and we need to find ways to survive and thrive. And how we adapt means also how well we're able to function, how well we're able to think and behave as a process of adapting to life and living our lives on a daily basis. Now, resilience is a developmental process. It grows and changes from our childhood into our adulthood, and it's also learned. We learn resiliency through role models. We learn resiliency from direct learning that we might gain from our parents, from other adults. And we also learn resiliency from the types of experiences that we have in the environment. Ways that we are given validation, ways that we're helped to problem solve, ways that we are helped to have self-esteem and feel that we can be confident in meeting life's challenges. all of those contribute to being a resilient person. Resilience refers to the positive role of individual differences in people's response to stress and adversity. Individual differences. We're not all the same. We don't all have the same reactions to events or problems that we encounter. Three people can experience the same problem. Let's say three people receive a failing grade in a course. That's not going to happen to any of you, right? But let's just hypothetically say that three people encounter a failing grade. One person is motivated to find out what they could have done better, how they can improve their study habits, how they can improve their relationship with their teacher, and finding ways to get back on track. That's being resilient. They may feel bad and they may be upset, but they still take positive steps to meet the problem. One of the three may completely fall apart, may feel that, oh no, my education is completely over, there's nothing I'll be able to do, and that person may fall into negative thinking, which does not demonstrate a whole lot of resiliency in being able to pick oneself up, dust oneself off, and keep on going. Resilience speaks to a person who regains functioning following adversity. So I'm sure that all of us can think of someone that we know, someone in our family or our peer group or a friend who has encountered really difficult circumstances, has been in a car accident, has been able to recover from their health issues, someone who has survived a traumatic experience, someone who's been able to keep going and not be held back by the way that they've experienced their life circumstances. Now, resilience doesn't mean that you don't have the feelings. Resilience doesn't mean that you don't fail. It means that you keep on going, even if you're uncertain, even if you're afraid, even if you're upset. It's the ability to return to a good state of functioning, and the capacity to feel and become more competent after experiencing some type of extreme stress. So I've been saying that resilience isn't only one thing, but resilience plays itself out in a variety of ways in each individual's life. So here are some common themes. Resilience can be viewed as a complex interplay between individual characteristics and their social environment. So resilience isn't something that is only internal, but it comes from that interaction between the person and their environment. Resilience consists of a balance between stress and the ability to cope. We talked in social systems about having equilibrium or a steady state. So part of being resilient is to maintain your ability to function despite difficult circumstances, and finding a balance between managing the stress and managing the ability to keep on functioning. Risk factors that stem from multiple stressful life events and protective factors that decrease the negative influence of risk, all of these contribute to resilience. So again, resilience is something that is learned. We can acquire more resilience through the experience of adversity, and also through using protective factors that we have in our social environment. Resilience is dynamic. It depends on the life context. So resilience sometimes usually I would say, can be transferred from one situation to another. If you're resilient in managing difficult relationships, for example, it may also help you in managing difficult work environments. However, it also is dependent on what is happening in each context. So, for example, a child may be resilient in school, may be able to do their work, may be smart, may be engaged, may be collaborating and participating in the classroom. Yet, that same child may go home in the afternoons and experience stress and feelings of being overwhelmed if they live in a home setting where there's dysfunction or conflict. The child may not be so resilient in their home environment. So that kind of adds to the whole picture of how a person may be resilient and the ways that we need to assess our clients from a social systems and ecological perspective. Resilience is developmental. If you think back on your own lives, maybe you can think of ways you were resilient as a child, and then how has that changed now that you're an adult? Are you more resilient? What have you learned about managing stress? How have you developed throughout your own life that has helped you to build towards being here in an MSW program and using skills that you've developed over time? Being successful strengthens a person's competence. So success breeds success. And the more successful you are, the more confident and competent you feel. And I would say that vice versa. Failing also increases the risk for more failure. If you have a lot of stressors, multiple stressors, it increases the risks for not being resilient. Resilience is most important in times of life transitions. So big changes in life, making big decisions, moving, especially moving out of on your own for the first time, moving in with someone, whether it's a roommate, and especially if you're moving in with a significant other. I mean, that may be a really good event. At the same time, it may also be stressful because you need to adapt and find ways of making your new situation work. Beginning a master's degree, graduate school, is also a big transition. You may be feeling overwhelmed, but I can confidently say that students find their stride, they adapt, they begin to learn the ways that where they can find social support and how to structure their work and family lives to make room for their education. So we've talked about resiliency, and protective factors are an important part of understanding how resiliency develops. And protective factors are also important to understand because when we assess our clients, we also need to assess the resources that they have to overcome their difficulties. So risk factors are factors that influence the ability to overcome difficult life situations. Protective factors are bolstered by situations and conditions that help individuals reduce risk and enhance adaptation. Protective factors may be internal personal characteristics, such as good problem-solving skills, right? Or good communication skills, or can be external environmental factors, such as factors in the support network. Maybe you have a family that's very supportive and provides a sense of security. Maybe it's a good friend or a peer who helps you to look at your difficulties or adversities and find ways to overcome them. Maybe it's someone who is a teacher, or maybe it's a group that you participate in that helps you to feel more competent. So the diagram here presents some ways that protective factors show up in our environment. Personal resilience, our intelligence, our communication, our maybe we have a good temperament that keeps us on an even keel, and we have personal resources that help us. Then maybe we have good parenting that helps to nurture and support us. And maybe we've had experiences where we've had optimal social and emotional developmental opportunities in our childhood, adolescence, that helps to support us as adults. We have good attachments with other people, other nurturing experiences and relationships that help us to feel like, I'm okay, I can get through this. Other social relationships and connections, and concrete supports in times of need. We have resources for food, shelter, clothing. We have resources for finding a job, for help in making ends meet, so on and so forth. So all of these factors are protective factors that contribute to successful children, strong families, competent individuals, and that also have an influence in creating strong community networks. Take a moment and think about what are the protective factors in your life. What support systems can you draw upon as you've taken on this graduate school in the midst of other life and family responsibilities? So who can you, or what can you feel you can lean on to help you get through the stresses that you're going to encounter? In simple terms, risk is the possibility of something bad happening. It's the possibility of having a bad outcome. Risk involves uncertainty about the effects or implications of an activity with respect to something that humans value, such as their health, their well-being, their wealth, their property, something else in the environment, their relationships, their ability to make choices in their lives. So a risk factor is something that has the potential to create an undesirable consequence or outcome. So this diagram here is an example of risk factors for suicide. So suicide is something we might encounter with a client, something that has been in the media the past couple of years with some very high-profile celebrities, famous people choosing to take their own lives. And we do know that certain groups are at high risk for suicide, such as LGBTQ adolescents are at disproportionate higher risk for committing suicide or for attempting suicide. So some of the risk factors that have been identified for adolescents is, number one, a previous suicide attempt is one of the biggest risk factors. Someone who has tried in the past is more likely to try again in the future. A history of substance abuse is another risk factor for suicide. Physical disability or illness may increase one's vulnerability and sense of despair, especially if there are very few social supports or resources to manage the illness or disability. Losing a friend or family member to suicide is a big risk factor. Exposure to bullying, mental health difficulties, death of a family member or close friend, access to guns or access to lethal weapons, and conflictive or difficult relationships that cause problems with people who are important to you. So these are examples of risk factors that have been researched and that are identified in the research literature as some of the major risk factors for adolescent suicide. This chart is broken down into 4 domains or 4 large areas. One large domain is the community, then the family, school, and the individual. On the left is a list of risk factors that increase the likelihood that young people will develop health and social problems. And on the far right are the protective factors that help to buffer the impact of risk factors on young people, help them to develop better ways of coping, and increases the likelihood that they will be successful in overcoming health and social adversities. I'm not going to talk through this whole slide. I encourage you to take a moment and look at this slide and compare the risk factors to the protective factors. Many of the factors that are on this slide that are identified in this chart are going to be factors that you're going to encounter as part of the assessments that you're going to be doing with your clients. So having familiarity with risk factors from the individual, the school, family, and community comprises an ecological perspective on risk and protective factors. And the final slide is just a compilation of some quotes that I really like about resilience. So resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. She was unstoppable, not because she did not have failures and doubts, but because she continued on despite them. One small crack does not mean you are broken. It means that you were put to the test and you didn't fail. And finally, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. On that note, the screencast is ended, and we will continue talking about resilience, risk, and protection throughout this course on human behavior and the social environment.